Caspar David Friedrich's painting, Wanderer Above a Sea of Fog, depicts a man overwhelmed by a rocky landscape. Painted in 1818, this artwork is an example of Romanticism, a comprehensive artistic, literary, musical, and intellectual movement that emphasized unity, growth, inspiration, and creative genius. During the early 19th century, artists such as Friedrich, Delacroix, and Goya evoked individualism, emotion, and the glorification of nature in their work. Romanticism was in many ways a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, anti-nationalist politics, and modernity. Theorist Isaiah Berlin believed that for over a century, Romanticism disrupted the classic Western traditions of rationality and the idea of moral absolutes and agreed values. In the realm of ethics, politics, and aesthetics, it was the authenticity and sincerity of the pursuit of inner goals that mattered, he said. This applied equally to individuals and groups, states, nations, movements. So you've seen the title of this video, and you're probably wondering, okay, so Romanticism. What does that have to do with Orchidelirium? And what is Orchidelirium anyway? Imagine yourself on the deck of a boat, around you, churning waves. You've been sailing for weeks. You are William Lobb, expert botanist. Below you, loaded into crates, are thousands of beautiful flowers. Orchids, to be exact, picked from the dense forests of South America. Many will perish in the dark, damp conditions. But to you, the perilous journey is worth it. Ahead of you lay the shores of Victorian England, where nobility will climb over one another to get their hands on one of these flowers. You'll be rich. This is Orchidelirium, a flower-hunting craze that swept through Europe during the 19th century. Hundreds of orchid hunters left Europe in search of rare, priceless flowers that grew in tropical biomes, from the Khasi hills of India to the San Martin region in northern Peru. It seemed like everyone was obsessed with orchids, even Charles Darwin. He used the flowers as evidence for his theory of natural selection, saying how there must be a moth able to pollinate the Star of Bethlehem orchid, in other words, a moth with a 12-inch tongue. Rare orchids from all corners of the world could get you mad money from collectors, but at a high price. Orchid hunting trips were dangerous, and deaths were common. Orchid hunters encountered wild animals, floods, tropical diseases, native indigenous nations, and fierce competition from one another. Colombia was a particularly dangerous place for orchid hunters, where prominent hunters died from drowning, dysentery, and yellow fever. In 1901, 8 orchid hunters made a fateful journey to the Philippines. One was eaten by a tiger, another had oil spilled on him and was burned alive, and 5 others vanished completely. The one who survived returned home with over 7,000 orchid specimens. The orchids were shipped overseas in a very careless manner and without the slightest indications of the conditions under which they had been growing. Sometimes orchids were used as stuffing for even rarer, pricier flowers. As the Orchidelirium craze progressed, special carrying cases called Wardian cases were developed. These were like mini greenhouses that could safely store flowers across long sea voyages. Crossing the ocean was difficult enough, but once displayed in Europe, the orchids would flourish for only a short period before dying. One orchid expert described how hundreds of beautiful species, which had been collected at great cost and risk, and were purchased by eager amateurs at home, oftentimes at high prices, rapidly died out. But that didn't stop collectors from displaying their expensive, delicate orchids in large galleries and greenhouses. If anything, the fleeting nature of the flowers increased their value. Many historians compare Orchidelirium to the fervent Dutch tulip mania of 1637, when the price of tulip bulbs grew exponentially and created an economic crisis. So why were orchids so sought after? And what does all of this have to do with Romanticism? Orchidelirium, in many ways, emerged because of Romanticism. What better a symbol of emotion, individuality, and new forms of expression than a unique, vibrant, and blooming flower? Expert in decorative arts Francis Lichten believed orchids were part of the warm emotional wave that washed over Europe when it found itself weary from 18th century cynicism. For this alteration in sentiment, she wrote, the world needed a symbol, and flowers, pink, white, and innocent as the young Victoria, were of that symbol the very essence. Orchidelirium was a direct product of Romanticism, and the flower fever was one of the ways society separated from the machine-heavy Industrial Revolution, the anti-nationalist attitudes of Clemens von Metternich, and the cold rationality of the Enlightenment. Although the orchid craze died out within a few decades due to changing aesthetics, rare species of orchids are still prized for their beauty and fragility more than 2 centuries later.